Hey, I hope you're doing well. This is Aria, and today we're creating a bouncing cloth and soft body simulation. There are already a few tutorials on this, but I just want to focus on trying to make the cloth a little bit more bouncy. Then of course we're going to add lighting and materials to finish the scene. If you enjoy this, make sure to like and subscribe, and for $5 a month you can get access to all of my animation files that you see on the channel. You'll also be supporting the growth of the channel as well. Okay, here we go. Let's open up a new scene in Blender, and by the way, Blender just released their version 2.92. You can check out some great videos on this as well with all of the updates included, but in regards to this channel, there are great new updates such as geometry nodes. There's a lot of updates for the physics as well. You can do this in any version of Blender, but I'm going to do it in 2.92 today. Hit A to select everything and then hit delete. Next we'll hit Shift A, Mesh, and let's add a plane. And this is going to be our trampoline surface. So the first thing we need to do is scale this. So hit S and type in 9. Then since we want to simulate this, we need to add some subdivisions. So let's hit Tab to go into edit mode, or again you can always click here. Right click and let's select Subdivide. Head down to the left here, open up this menu and set the number of cuts to 25. Tab to go back into object mode. We need to apply our scale to our object, otherwise our simulations could have errors. So to apply our scale, we're going to hold Control, hit A, and select Scale. Now that we've got that, we want to add a cloth physics, so let's head over to the right to the physics properties and select cloth. Since we're on frame 44, our object is started to simulate, so let's just click here and head back to frame 1. And now we can start to change our settings. It's not often that I would tell you to lower your quality steps, but in this case something a little bit lower seems to work visually a little bit better, so you can go somewhere between 3 and 5, but definitely don't set this any higher than that, otherwise the cloth won't be quite as bouncy. Now we can just scroll down and we're just going to make a couple little changes to the stiffness and the damping, so just select the bending for both of these and set them both to 0. We won't need internal springs, so let's just close that down. As well, we're not going to be using pressure, so let's close that down as well. So if I hit play, you can see that our cloth just starts falling down, which of course is not what we're going to want. We want it to stay in place. And the best way to do that is to add a pin group. If you go into the shape settings here in the physics, you can see that we've got pin group here. But when we click that, there's nothing to select, so let's just create that. So in the 3D viewport, hit Tab to go into edit mode, then we're going to click away so that nothing is selected. Then either in vertex or edge select mode, we're going to hold Alt and click this edge. Shift Alt and we're going to click these 3 edges as well. And the cool thing about this is you don't have to be exact. You can just sort of click near and Blender will get the idea. Now that we've got our edge selected, let's head over to the object data properties. Then we want to put these vertex points into a group, so let's click here to add a new group, and we can name this edge. Once we've got these selected, really important, we need to click assign to add them to the group. Back into object mode, then we'll head over to the physics properties. Scroll down to our shape properties, and now if we click here, you see that we've got this group, so let's select that. And now if I hit play, you can see that we've got a much different result where all of our outer vertices are locked down and everything else is being affected. I'm just going to head back to frame 1, then let's head back over here, and since we're trying to create a trampoline effect, we want to add some shrinking, and what this will do is sort of create an elastic effect for our cloth, so let's turn that on to something like 0.5. And then if I hit play, you can see that it kind of looks like nothing is happening at all. So I can show you if I just go back to frame 1, and for now if I just get rid of our pin group and hit play, you can see that everything sort of gets sucked into the center. So basically this is just pulling really tightly. So of course when we add our pin group, things will hold tight to the edge. Next we can open up collisions, and then depending on your system you kind of want to go as high as you can. So I'm just going to set this to 5 for now. Then we also want to add self-collisions as well. This isn't going to really matter as much since we just sort of got like a flat plane. This would work better for something like a closed mesh, but we're just going to turn that on because I think it helps calculate a little bit better. And that's it for our cloth settings. So now we can hit all the way back up to the top. Then we want to add a collision modifier just to make sure that when we add our soft bodies, they will collide properly. I'm just going to close the cloth settings for a second, and to get the most out of our bounce, I'm just going to set the damping and friction to 0. Now we can just name this trampoline and move on to our next step. Now let's add our first icosphere, so Shift A and let's click icosphere. Then just for the moment, I'm just going to drag this up just a little bit to a random height. So now we want to right click and shade smooth. Then head over to the modifier properties, click here and add a subdivision surface of 2. Head over to the right and we're going to click here to go into the physics and select soft body. First thing that we're going to do is turn off the gold. Basically what we're doing is this kind of works as a pin group as well. If we were to turn it on and hit play, you can see that it kind of wants to stay in one place, and as well, just like the pin group, you can actually select a specific vertex group if you wanted this to hang from a specific point, for example. Then of course, these are just the strength settings here. We don't need this today, so let's just turn that off. If I was to hit play again, you can see that it falls really slow, and the reason is because sometimes in Blender simulations work better when they're gigantic like this. You can see our trampoline alone is 18 by 18 meters, which is quite massive. But it does help our simulation to be a little bit more accurate, so we're going to leave it like that for now. What we can do instead is let's just select our icosphere, and then if we open up the simulation tab, instead of having this run at a speed of 1, we can set it to 2. Now if I hit play, you can see that it falls a lot quicker and looks a little bit more natural. Open up our edges settings here. We want to remove all of the damping pretty much everywhere we go. We're going to be setting the damp to 0 just so that we can maximize our bounce. As well, we don't want this to crumple as we fall, so let's set our bending to 2. Next, we can add stiffness just to give our object a little bit more stiffness, and you can already see that we're getting a nice bounce now. As well, we want to add self-collisions. If I hit play, you'll notice one thing, that it does bounce, but we're not getting any reaction from the cloth. So what we need to do is add a collision physics to our object as well. So again, in the physics tab, we're just going to go here and click collision. Now if we scroll all the way down, you can see our collision settings are at the bottom here. And just like before, we want to set our damping to 0 and our friction to 0 as well. Then if I zoom in and hit play, you can see now that we've got a better reaction with our cloth. One problem that we added though was that our object doesn't bounce quite as high just because it is reacting to our cloth. So there is one more setting that we're going to change, and it's right here under the first tab, Object. And again, you'll see friction, so let's set that to 0. And as well, let's set our mass to something like 0.5, just so that our object is a little bit lighter. And now if we play, it is working a little bit better, but we still need to maximize this. So what we want to do is make sure this is falling at the speed of gravity by the time it hits. So we're just going to zoom out, and we want to bring this up. And you don't want to go too high, otherwise you can get issues with your collisions, but there is a happy medium. So if I was to set this to 60, for example, and hit play, you can see that it has a pretty decent bounce. And if I set it lower to 40 and hit play, it kind of gets roughly about the same height. But one more time, if I bring this down by half again to 20, and now I hit play, you'll see that we get a lot larger of a jump. So keep in mind that having this way up doesn't necessarily mean that it will bounce higher. You just want to play with these settings. So I found that 20 worked really good to get the most out of the bounce. And save. So again, just make sure that all your frictions are low. You can play with the mass. If it's bouncing too high and I raise the mass, you can see now that of course it will bounce a lot lower. So you could go in between that as well if you want. Just find something that works for you. And that's it for that. So what I did, of course, was duplicate these a bunch. So hit 7 on your numpad to go into top orthographic. And then you can just hit Shift D to duplicate, and then Shift Z to lock to the X and Y, and you just want to make a bunch of copies. You could use an array modifier to do something like this, but I think this is just a little bit quicker just to quickly manually do it, since there's not a whole lot of these. Once you've got them spread out on your X and Y, we can just come back to our original view, and I'm just going to zoom out and move these up and down on the Z. What this will do is give them different rates of speed as well as their bounce height. Once you've got that, what you can do is just select all these, hit Shift D, Z, and then just drag this up a bit. Type in R to rotate, Z, and type in 90. Then again, you just want to move these in place. So if you go into overhead view, you just want to make sure that none of these are overlapping. And something like that should work pretty good as well. If you want to just select some of these at random, what you can do is scale these, but we don't want to just scale it like it is. What we need to do is click here, and then instead of scaling on the median point of all our objects, we want to select individual origins. Then S to scale and type in 0.5. Make sure to set this back to median point just so that it's at default. Because we scaled these, we want to apply our scale as well, so Control A to apply our scale. I am also going to click this one at the top here and hit S to scale and type in 2 to make it a little bit larger. Then again, one more time, Control A and click scale to apply our scale. If I hit play one more time, you can see that we've got all of our balls falling and they're looking really good. Obviously, this one's bouncing way into the air, and if you want to bring that down, there's a few ways to do that, but I'm just going to head over to the soft body settings and change the mass to 0.75. It probably should be heavier anyway since it's larger. Hit play one more time, and now that's looking a lot better. It's not going too high. Now that we've got that complete, what we can do is just organize ourselves a little bit. So just head over to the right and click on Scene Collection. Then let's click here to add a new collection. And we want to select all of our icospheres. So click, then Shift Select. Then you want to just drag and drop into collection number 2. Feel free to rename this if you want, but I'll just leave it at that for now. Then make sure to select back on the first collection just so when we add new things, they go into here. If I zoom in, you can see right away that we've got an issue with our cloth where it's looking a little bit blocky, so let's select it, right click, and shade smooth to start. Zoom out, and what we'll do next is I'm just going to set this back to frame 1, head over to the modifiers, and to get that look that I had for my trampoline, what we want to do is just add 2 different modifiers. So select this. And the first one we want to select is Wireframe. Let's set this super low, so something like 0.005. Then one more time, we're going to click here and add a subdivision surface of 1. Just let this play through a little bit more, and you can see now that we got this really nice reaction with our cloth. By the way, someone mentioned that they wanted to see this a little bit more reactive, so there is a way that you can do that if you just click on the cloth and head over to the physics. Then again, just make sure you open up the cloth settings, head all the way down, and when we set our shrinking factor, it pulls things pretty tight, which helps us get our bounce. But if you want this to be a little bit less bouncy, you could set this to something like 0.05. And when our items hit, there's a lot more reaction with our cloth. So if that's something that you're looking for, you can set that up that way. I'm just going to go halfway in between for now, so 0.25. And again, always just take this as a guide. Every simulation is going to be different, so you want to make sure that it's working for your simulation. Now we can move on back to frame 1, and then we just want to add the frame for our trampoline. So Shift A, Mesh, and let's click Cube. S to scale, Shift Z, then just type in something like 9 or 10. Tab to go into edit mode. Hit 3 on your keyboard, or click here for face select. Click this top face, hit delete, and face. Then underneath as well, let's click here, delete, and face. Tap back into object mode, then let's scale this on the Z, so S, Z, and type in 0.2. Head over to the modifiers properties, click here, and let's add a Solidify Modifier. Set the value to 0.5. And of course, again, we need to apply our scale for that to work correctly, so Control A and click Scale. Then you do want to make sure that this is just outside of our cloth. Since we're going to add a collision modifier to it, you don't want it interfering with the cloth. So S to scale, Shift Z, then hold Shift, and you can just drag this out until this is just a little bit larger than our cloth. If you want to add bevel, hit Tab to go into edit mode, A to select everything. And you'll see it looks kind of weird. It's only selecting this outer edge, so what we need to do is apply our solidify. So let's head back into the modifiers, click and click apply. Now if we hit Tab again, you'll notice that we can select all of our geometry. Hold Control and hit B. Then if you hold Shift and just drag your mouse outward, you can see that we can start adding a bevel. Scroll up once on your mouse wheel to add a cut, and then click. Tab to go back into object mode, right click, shade smooth, then let's subdivide this, so modifiers and subdivision surface. Then since our spheres may interact with this, we want to make sure that we add a collision, so head over to the physics and select collision. I'm going to remove both the damping and the friction. Then as well for this, I'm going to make sure to set some thickness just so that our soft bodies don't get stuck. If you find that one of your soft bodies gets stuck on the edge here, you can just increase this a little bit more. But like I said, make sure that this is not touching your cloth. If it is, and I hit play, you can see that there's a weird reaction, so you don't want that. So again, you just want to make sure that this is sitting just outside of our cloth. The order of modifiers is pretty important, so just make sure to put your collision above your subdivisions, and then that way Blender won't need to calculate all of the subdivisions before it has a collision. We want to add a ground plane, so I'm just going to hit A to select everything and just bring everything up a little bit. So G, Z, and type in 2. Then Shift A, Mesh, and let's select plane again. S to scale and type in 100. We're going to add some displacement to this, so let's subdivide this by hitting Tab. Right click, subdivide, and let's set the number of cuts to 50. Tab again, back into object mode, and if you want to get the same sort of ground texture that I had, I used modifiers for this, so it is again a little bit heavy, but if you want to do it, select this and let's go to wireframe again. The wireframe is huge, so again we need to apply our scale, Control A and select scale. For the thickness, let's type in 0.5. Select this again and add a subdivision surface. Then to get that raised look, let's uncheck Replace Original. And as well, I'm going to set the thickness to 0.5. Next, we can add a background, so Shift A, Mesh, and Cube. S to scale, Shift Z, and again type in 100. S to scale again, Z, and you can type in something like 50. Tab into edit mode, and since we're using an Hdri, we want to make sure that we delete this top face. Since we've already got a ground plane, we can also delete the bottom face as well, so delete that. And now we can go back into object mode and just bring this up a little bit. That should be good, so I'm just going to zoom back in. You'll see that we got a lot of extra here, so we can just hit S to scale and hit Z just to bring this down quite a bit. And line it up a little bit better. So something around these values here. Now we can add the legs for our trampoline, so Shift A, Mesh, and let's click Cylinder. Then I'm going to hit 7 again to go into top orthographic. G to move. Shift Z and then just drag this over until the pivot point is at the corner. Then you just want to scale this on the X and Y, so hit S to scale, Shift Z, and then just drag this down to something like 0.2. Now we can just bring this up and scale it a little bit on the Z until it's in place. Make sure to shade smooth. Hit 7 on the numpad again, and now we can duplicate these, so Shift D and hit Y. And drag this all the way over. Shift D again, but this time hit X. Then one more time, Shift D and hit Y. And drag this all the way down. The final geometry that I had in my scene was some spheres in the background, so Shift A, Mesh, and let's click UV Sphere. Then I'm just going to come into the side view here. Just want to bring this back, G, X, and minus 50. So I'm just going to scale this up a bit, so S in 5, G and Z just to bring this up. 7 to go into top orthographic, then Shift D, Shift Z. And this will be a lot easier if you use a camera, so just quickly I'm going to add that, so Shift A and select camera. Line up your view to something that you think will work. Hold Control, Alt, and hit 0 on the numpad, which will lock your camera to the view. Then now I'm just going to quickly set up something like that, and you can see already this is looking a little bit small, so let's hit S to scale and we can just drag this up until it looks good. And then if we're just thinking about thirds, we just want to make sure that this is sort of sitting on our third here. I'm just going to set this to an even number, so something like 19. Then Shift D, Y, and you can just bring this over to around minus 19 on the Y. And that's looking great, so just right click and shade smooth all 3 of these. Then one more thing I forgot to mention is some of the spheres may bounce off of the trampoline surface, so instead of having them crash to the ground, we do want them to have some type of ground collision out here, but if we add a collision to this, it's going to be quite heavy. So let's just add in another plane, Shift A, plane, S to scale, and type in 25. Then you just want to bring this up a little bit so that it's sort of intersecting our ground. Head over to the physics, collision, and then just remove the damp and the friction. We don't need to see this either, so again, just head up to the collection tab and turn this off in the viewport and the render. Make sure to leave this center toggle on so that it calculates as part of the simulation. Now that we've got everything there, we can finally bake our simulation. So you can either select the cloth or any one of these spheres. Head over to the right into the physics, and then we're going to open up the cache settings. Make sure this matches your animation length. Then instead of baking, we're going to hit Bake All Dynamics, which will do a bake for everything in our scene. Once everything is finished baking, make sure to save. Then you can just scroll through, and now we can just pick a frame that we like just so that we can work on something nice. I'm just going to set my camera up a little bit better. Then I'm just going to bring my camera in a little bit just so that I'm maximizing the viewport. Now that we've got all of our physics and geometry, we can start adding our lighting and materials. So let's head to shading. Just click here to go back into our camera view, or hit 0 on the numpad. If I was to turn on the render preview, you can see that we basically just got this gray shading over everything. So the first thing we want to do is just add a base lighting with an Hdri. So in the shading editor, click here and select world. Zoom out a bit, and then instead of having a gray background, we can add an HDR. You can search for environment texture, but a quicker way to do it is just to head up to the world properties. Select this dot and click environment texture. This will add the node for you, and then you can click open. If you want to use the HDRI that I'm using, just head to the link in the description, scroll down, then since we're using this for lighting only, let's use the 1K version. Then click open. Great, so now that we've got our base lighting, I'm just going to do one more thing to this. If you've got the Node Wrangler add-on, you can select your environment texture, hit Ctrl and T to add these two nodes. You can also search for these, but if you want to get this add-on, just make sure to go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Node. And make sure the Node Wrangler is turned on. Now we can just use this to rotate our HDRI. I'm going to set mine to something around 150. And this is a little bit too bright, so the other thing I'm going to do is just go over to the strength of the background and type in 0.5. That's great. So now what we can do is back over to the left here. Let's go back into the Object Shading tab. And just before we add our materials, we want to add our lighting. So we just want to add one point light. So Shift A, let's head all the way down to light and select point. Then hit G and just bring this up and to the left. And back just so it's near this corner back here. Now we can head over to the right and click this little light bulb icon. Select the color. Then we can just set this to a green color. And crank the power all the way to 50,000. As well, let's just change the radius to 4. Which just gives it a nicer fall off. Then finally we can start adding our materials. So let's select our trampoline and click New. Then most of these materials are going to be super simple. So for the trampoline, first let's click the base color. Then bring the value all the way down to around 25%. Set the roughness to 0.15. And as well, I added a bump. So Shift A and search for bump. And hook the normal into the normal. Shift A one more time and search for noise. Take the factor and hook it into the height. And then set the scale to 2500. And next, let's select our ground and click New. Select the base color. Then we want to select a medium green, and let's bring our value down somewhere around the middle as well. Now we can select our background cube, which is our wall back here. By the way, feel free to rename these just so that you don't get too lost. Next, we can click New, and then we'll just make this a light green color. I rendered my final image in Cycles, so what I'm going to do is just swap over now, but feel free to continue along in Eevee as well. If you are using Cycles and have a GPU, make sure to enable that. Next, we can select our background sphere and click New. We're going to also make this a light green color, so select the base color and let's make this a nice light green. Set the metallic to 0.5, and then we just want to click and drag our roughness all the way down to around 0.08. You can name this material if you want sphere. Then now you can select the other two spheres, click here and select the sphere texture. Next we can click the frame and click New again. Let's add a slight green color again, just in keeping with the aesthetic. Set the metallic to 0.5 and the roughness to 0.25. I'm just going to name this material frame, then we're just going to add that to each of the legs as well. And then the final material that we need to add is for our sphere. So select the sphere, and again we're going to click New one more time. Set the metallic to 0.4, the roughness to 0.15, and let's set the transmission to 1. Then instead of clicking all of these and adding this material, what we can do is go into our collection on the right. We want to select all of these, so shift select all of these, and then whatever one has the material, make sure to control select that one last. So that we've got our current selection on this. Head up to the left, click Object, make links, and select Materials. Now that we've got all our materials, we can head back into the Layout tab and turn on our Render Preview again. Then I always like to add some depth of field to my camera, so select the camera and head down into the camera properties. Turn on depth of field. Then we need a focus object. Normally I create an empty, but in this case we can just click the eyedropper and select our trampoline, which will just center our focus. Finally, you want to set your f-stop to something super low, like 0.1 or 2. Keep in mind that the lower you set this, the longer it will take to render. To animate the camera, it's super easy. Just go into flat shading, and since we're on frame 114, we have a really nice frame. Make sure you've got the camera selected, open up the item tab, and let's hit a keyframe on the location and rotation. Then if we head back to frame 1, we can hit F3 and search for walk navigation. Use your arrow keys and your mouse to zoom in and out. I'm just going to go in a little bit here. Then once you're happy, hit I, and in this case you could either click available or just location and rotation. Just hover over the timeline, T, and select linear. Then just head to the final frame in the animation, walk navigation, and you can just set up your final frame. And then just set a keyframe. Then that's it. It's a little bit slow, but if I hit play, you can see that we've got our final animation. Great, so now what we can do is pick a frame that you like, head into the rendering tab. I'm just going to give mine more resolution, and as well I'm going to add some denoising to the render. If you've got a GPU, use optics, and if you just got a CPU, you can use the open image denoise. Make sure to save and render image. Awesome, and that's looking really good. You can see that these look a little bit blurry, but that's just because there's motion blur. If I turn that off, you'll see that these turn out much clearer. But if you are rendering out an animation, you definitely want to have this on, and once you have this in motion, you won't see any of those blurry effects. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please like and subscribe if you did. And again, if you want to get my original animation file for this with a lot longer of an animation and more spheres, head over to my Patreon page and sign up to become a member. Awesome. I hope to see you soon. Bye.